I never thought I would start my 63rd birthday staring at a bottle that might hold more questions than answers. The tag tied around its neck read only 2 words, "Happy Birthday," and nothing else. No name, no sentiment, no signature. Just 2 words, written in a hand I knew like the lines of my own palm. It was my son's handwriting. Daniel. I hadn't seen him in 3 years. 3 years since the day he slammed my door, his voice sharp as broken glass, accusing me of favoritism, of selfishness, of clinging to money that should have been his. I had watched his back retreat down the driveway, thinking he might come around in a week, maybe 2. He never did. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. The box had arrived that morning, left on the front porch of my little house in our Ohio town. The sun had just started crawling up over the rooftops. The church bell had not yet rung the first call to morning service, and there it was, brown cardboard, tied with a cheap piece of string. I carried it inside, set it on the kitchen table, the same table where I sorted pills each morning into my plastic organizer, 1 for the heart, 1 for blood pressure, 1 for the arthritis. 63 years old, and this kitchen table had become my battlefield. Inside the box sat a bottle of whiskey so fine it didn't belong in a house like mine. Dark amber liquid shimmered under the morning light, the label stamped with gold lettering, the kind of bottle you'd expect to see on display behind a mahogany bar in some fancy club. I hadn't had a drink in 3 years, not since the cardiologist looked me dead in the eye and said, "Arthur, one more night with a glass in your hand might be your last." I quit cold. And yet here it was, a bottle from Daniel, the son who knew my condition better than anyone. He'd been there when the doctor delivered the warning. He'd carried me out of that clinic parking lot, silent and pale. He knew. So why this gift? I held the tag between my fingers, tracing the familiar slant of his handwriting. Memories rushed back like unwelcome guests. Daniel at 16, begging me to co-sign a loan for a car I couldn't afford. Daniel at 25, fuming when I refused to cash out part of my retirement for his business idea. Daniel at 30, standing beside his mother's hospital bed, barely speaking to her in her final weeks. I sat there for a long time, just me, the bottle, and the hum of the refrigerator. Outside, a school bus hissed to a stop, children's voices rang in the distance, and life moved on like it always does. But inside, something shifted. That gift felt less like a celebration and more like a message. Later that morning, I stepped out onto my porch. The old boards creaked under my slippers, the autumn air sharp in my lungs. Mrs. Collins from across the street waved, a casserole dish balanced on her hip. "Happy birthday, Arthur," she called. I forced a smile and waved back, but my mind was still inside, at the kitchen table, circling around that bottle. When I walked to the mailbox, I caught myself glancing at the Harris place 2 doors down. Michael Harris, my neighbor, Daniel's father-in-law, a decent man. He had once climbed onto my roof after a summer storm to patch the shingles, sweat pouring down his back, refusing to take a dime in payment. Neighbors help neighbors, he'd said, that simple. I trusted him more than I trusted my own blood. I shuffled back inside, set my letters down, and looked again at the whiskey. A strange heaviness settled over me. My birthday had never felt this lonely. I used to share it with my wife, Marjorie. She would bake me a pecan pie, and Daniel would come by, at least with a card. Now it was just me, the silent house, and a bottle that didn't make sense. I poured myself a glass of water instead, watching the whiskey glow on the counter. I tried to brush off the unease, telling myself maybe Daniel was reaching out in his clumsy way. Maybe this was an olive branch. But then I remembered the look in his eyes the last time we spoke, hard, resentful, almost hateful. That memory pressed against my chest harder than any angina ever had. As the day dragged on, visitors trickled in. Linda, my sister, dropped by with a basket of muffins, hugged me a little too long, and whispered, "You doing all right, Art?" I lied, told her yes. George Simmons called from across town, an old buddy from my factory days, his voice gravelly with years of cigarettes. "Happy birthday, you stubborn fool," he said. We laughed, but even his chuckle couldn't shake the shadow in my kitchen. When evening settled, I turned off the lamp and sat by the window, Streetlights blinked on, one by one, throwing pale circles onto the pavement. I could hear the faint echo of hymn practice from the church, the choir warming up for Sunday. My eyes drifted back to the bottle once more. It sat like an intruder in my house, beautiful but wrong, whispering questions I didn't want to answer. The night after my birthday, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning on the old mattress, staring up at the ceiling where a water stain had spread like a brown map of some country I'd never visit. The bottle was still in the kitchen. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it glimmering there, that gold-lettered label shining in the dark. It wasn't just whiskey to me anymore. It was a question, and maybe a warning. By morning, my chest felt heavy from more than the usual stiffness. I shuffled into the kitchen, poured my pills into my palm, and swallowed them with cold tap water. The whiskey bottle sat on the counter like an uninvited guest. I told myself again what I'd told myself all night. I wasn't going to drink it. But if I wasn't, then what? Leave it there to mock me? Throw it out? Both felt wrong. That's when Michael Harris came to mind. Michael was one of those rare neighbors you could count on. Years back, after a storm peeled shingles off my roof, he climbed up with a hammer and nails before I even asked. He was older than Daniel, but still strong, still steady. Michael had a way about him, quiet, dependable, no games. I figured maybe the bottle belonged with him. If Daniel had sent it with some good intention, it shouldn't go to waste, and if the intention wasn't so good, well, at least it wouldn't be me taking the risk. Late that morning, I carried the box 2 doors down. Michael was out front sweeping leaves off his porch. His daughter Emily's car wasn't in the drive, which meant she was at work. Michael leaned on the broom handle when he saw me. "Well, Arthur, happy birthday again. You don't look much like celebrating." "I'm not," I admitted. "I lifted the box. This showed up yesterday. Thought maybe you'd appreciate it more than I could." He set the broom aside, opened the box, and whistled low. "That's a fine bottle. You sure you don't want to keep it for a special occasion?" "Doctor says I can't touch it. 3 years sober, thanks to this heart." I tapped my chest. "Besides, I don't drink alone. Never felt right." Michael nodded, respectful. "Then I'll raise a glass for you tonight. Neighbors help neighbors, huh?" Those words echoed the same thing he told me years ago on the roof. I smiled, but it was weak. Something inside me still twisted. Still, I handed it over. That evening, I sat on my porch as the sky turned red over the steeple. Children rode their bikes in the street, their laughter carrying. I could hear Michael's screen door open, the muffled clink of glasses. For a moment, I tried to imagine it was just a normal night in a normal neighborhood. But normal shattered when, an hour later, an ambulance came screaming down the street, lights bouncing off every window. It stopped right in front of Michael's house. My heart nearly seized. I shuffled down the walk, my slippers slapping the pavement. Emily had just pulled into the drive, her face drained of color as paramedics carried Michael out on a stretcher. "Dad collapsed," she stammered, clutching her phone. He was just sitting in his chair, and then he couldn't breathe. I grabbed the porch rail for balance, my knees weak. The whiskey bottle flashed in my mind. "Emily," I said, my voice shaking, "did he drink from that bottle tonight?" Her eyes widened. "Yes." He said, "It was a gift from you." The paramedics pushed past us, Michael's chest rising unevenly under the oxygen mask. Emily climbed into the ambulance with him. The siren wailed again, and they sped off into the night. I stood frozen on the lawn, neighbors gathering in hushed clusters. Mrs. Collins whispered, "Lord, help him." My hands trembled. I had given him that bottle. My gift might have poisoned him. Back inside my house, I collapsed into the kitchen chair, staring at the empty space on the counter where the bottle had been. I thought about Daniel again, about the tag with his handwriting. Why would my own son send me something that could harm me? He knew my condition. He knew better. Unless... The phone rang. I jumped. It was Linda, my sister. "Arthur, I heard the sirens. What happened?" I told her, stumbling over the words, my throat tight. She was silent for a long moment. Then she said softly, "Maybe it's just coincidence. Maybe it's nothing to do with that bottle." But the way she said it, careful, afraid, told me she thought the same thing I did. The hospital lights always seemed too bright, too sterile. as if they could burn away the fear gathering in every corner. I sat beside Michael's bed the morning after the ambulance had rushed him here, listening to the slow, steady beeping of machines that told me he was still alive. Emily had her head bowed, lips moving in a prayer she whispered more to herself than to God. A doctor came in, his white coat rustling, clipboard in hand. He gave us the kind of measured smile doctors give when they're not sure how much truth to unload. We ran tests, he said. Your father's system shows traces of a toxin. It's unusual, not something we see in common food poisoning cases. We're still narrowing it down. I felt my chest seize. The words dropped heavy, each one a nail. I thought of the bottle immediately, the amber glow, the broken seal. My stomach turned cold. Emily asked questions in a rush about treatment, about recovery. I only half heard her. My mind was already circling back to Daniel, my son, the boy who had once slept under my roof, who knew every corner of my life, who knew I had stopped drinking because of my heart. He had sent me that bottle. And now Michael was lying here, fighting for air. When I left the hospital, the air outside cut like ice, though the calendar still claimed it was autumn. I sat in my truck for a long while, staring at my own reflection in the windshield. I kept seeing Daniel's face, his angry eyes the day he walked out, the way his jaw clenched when he accused me of hoarding money. Why would he send that bottle? Was it some twisted peace offering, or was it meant as punishment? The thought twisted my insides until I felt sick. That evening, as I sat at my kitchen table, the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting Linda. Instead, it was Daniel. Dad, he said quickly, breathless. Did you drink it yet? His tone rattled me more than the words. It wasn't casual, wasn't curious. It was sharp, urgent. No, I said slowly. I didn't. Michael had some. The silence that followed was long enough for me to hear my own pulse thudding in my ears. Then Daniel muttered something too muffled to catch and hung up. I set the receiver down, my hand trembling. For the first time, suspicion hardened into something heavier, fear. Linda came by the next day with a basket of soup and cornbread. She sat across from me, eyes searching my face as I told her everything, the doctor's words, Daniel's call. She put her spoon down, her lips pressed tight. Arthur, you can't jump to conclusions. We don't know for sure. But you think the same thing I do, I said. Her silence told me enough. She reached across the table, squeezed my hand. He's still your son. Be careful what you let yourself believe. I looked past her to the counter, where the empty box still Saturday. Something tugged at me, a detail I hadn't studied closely before. When she left, I took the box in my hands, turning it under the light. That's when I saw it. The seal on the cork hadn't been whole. A faint crease ran across it, a mark left by fingers prying it open and pressing it shut again. My chest tightened. This wasn't paranoia anymore. Someone had tampered with that bottle before it ever reached my doorstep. I hardly slept that night. I sat in the kitchen with the lamp on, staring at the empty spot where the bottle had been, my mind replaying every conversation I'd had with Daniel in the last 5 years. The arguments over money, the bitterness after his mother's funeral, the silence that stretched into years. The boy I raised was gone, and in his place, I was starting to see a man who might want me gone too. I thought I had known loneliness before, back when the house went silent after Marjorie passed. But this was different. This was the kind of loneliness that came with realizing someone you brought into the world might be the very person who wanted you gone. The days blurred together. I visited Michael at the hospital, watching his chest rise and fall beneath the thin blanket. He was awake sometimes, too weak to talk much. Emily hovered, adjusting his pillows, feeding him ice chips. Every time she looked at me, I saw the same unspoken question in her eyes. Was it the whiskey? Neither of us dared to say it out loud in front of him. Back home, the quiet pressed harder. I'd find myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the space on the counter where the bottle had been, as if waiting for it to reappear and confess the truth. The smallest things unsettled me, the creak of the porch boards at night, the flicker of the porch light, the rustle of leaves that sounded too much like footsteps. I began locking the doors twice, checking the windows before bed. One evening, as I carried the trash out, I thought I saw someone across the street, standing in the shadows near Mrs. Collins's hedge. By the time I squinted, the figure was gone. Maybe it was just a trick of the dark. Or maybe it wasn't. Daniel called again 2 nights later. The phone rang after midnight, shrill in the silence. I almost didn't answer, but some part of me still clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, he would explain. His voice came through low, urgent. "Dad, we need to talk. In person." "Why?" My throat was dry. "Because you don't understand. You're making things worse." I gripped the receiver, staring at the old clock on the wall. "Michael is in the hospital because of that bottle. You know what was in it, don't you?" His breath hissed through the line. For a moment I thought he might admit it, but then he snapped, "Stop blaming me for everything. You always have." And the line went dead again. I sat there, the dial tone buzzing, my hand shaking. The hope I'd carried shrank into something brittle and sharp. Linda came by the following afternoon. She found me on the porch, rubbing my temples. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she said. "I haven't," I admitted. He called again. Won't give me a straight answer. She lowered herself into the chair beside me, the wood creaking under her weight. "Arthur, maybe it's time to involve someone outside the family. Alvarez, maybe. You can't carry this alone." "I keep thinking of him as a little boy," I said softly. "But he's not that boy anymore." Linda sighed, eyes misty. "That's the hardest part, isn't it? Letting go of who they used to be." "They were set a rest of that." I carried the box to George's place with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. He lived on the edge of town, in a weathered farmhouse where the paint had long surrendered to the sun. George had been my friend since the factory days, back when our backs were stronger and our nights shorter. These days he worked part-time at the veterinary lab, running tests on livestock feed and water supplies. If anyone could give me an answer, it was him. He opened the door, squinting against the morning light. His hair was silver now, but his frame was still solid, the kind of man who looked like he'd never let the years win easy. "Arthur," he said, nodding slowly, "you look like hell." "Feel like it too," I admitted, stepping inside. His kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and hay. I set the box on his table and peeled back the flaps. The bottle gleamed under the light, its seal still creased where it had once been broken. George studied it with a frown. "This the one?" "Yes. The same bottle Michael drank from." My voice cracked. "He almost died, George, and I can't shake the thought that Daniel sent it to me on purpose." George didn't answer right away. He picked up the bottle with careful hands, turning it under the light like it might confess something if he stared hard enough. Finally, he said, "I'll take it to the lab. I can run basic toxicology screens. If something's in here, we'll know." "This Lev, that Selv." Relief and dread tangled in my chest. "Thank you. I don't know who else I could turn to." "You did right bringing it here," he said. "We'll get answers." The next few days crawled by. I tried to keep busy, mowing the patchy lawn, tightening the loose hinges on the back gate, even sorting through old photo albums I'd kept in the hall closet. But everything circled back to Daniel. I lingered on a photo of him at 12, grinning under a baseball cap, a smudge of dirt across his cheek. His mother had snapped that picture after a Little League game, proud as could be. I traced his face with my finger, wondering how a boy with eyes that bright could grow into a man who might poison his own father. Each night, I waited for the phone to ring, half dreading, half hoping it would be him. Sometimes it was Linda, checking in with a casserole, or just her steady voice. Sometimes Emily called from the hospital with updates about her father. But Daniel stayed silent. When George finally called, it was late in the evening. I sat up straighter at the sound of his gravelly voice. "Arthur," he said, "I've got results." My heart pounded. "Tell me." "There's something in that whiskey. Extracts from a plant called white snakeroot. It's rare, but it's toxic, especially to the heart. A small dose can kill livestock." "For someone with your condition," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I pressed the receiver tight against my ear, breath shallow. "So Michael was poisoned," George confirmed. "But he's lucky he's stronger than most. You, on the other hand, Arthur, if you'd taken a sip, you wouldn't be here right now." The room seemed to tilt around me. My throat closed up, and for a long moment I couldn't speak. Finally, I managed, "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without a court-certified lab. But the evidence is there. "Arthur, you need to take this to the police." The thought made my stomach knot. Turning my son over to the law, how could a father do that? But the image of Michael pale and trembling in the hospital bed burned in my mind. "Arthur," George said gently, "if Daniel sent this to you, he won't stop. You have to protect yourself." I swallowed hard, the weight of it crushing. "I'll think about it." That night, I sat on my porch, watching the street lamps flicker on one by one. Neighbors passed with dogs on leashes, their laughter floating through the air. I felt apart from it all, like I was standing on the edge of some cliff no one else could see. Linda stopped by with her Bible tucked under her arm. She sat beside me, reading my face before I said a word. "He poisoned the bottle," I whispered. "George found white snake root in it. It was meant for me." Her breath caught. She clutched the Bible tighter. "Arthur, I can't wrap my mind around it," I said. "I keep asking myself what I did wrong. Was I too hard on him? Not hard enough?" Linda shook her head firmly. "This isn't about what you did. Choices like this come from inside a person. Don't carry his sins as your burden." Her words settled over me like a quilt, warm but heavy. Still, the thought gnawed at me. Could I really hand my own son to the police? I stared down the street, shadows lengthening under the lamps. And somewhere in that silence, I realized I didn't have forever to decide. Sleep wouldn't come to me that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the lamp glowing faintly above, the kind of light that casts more shadows than it clears. My thoughts circled endlessly. Reporting Daniel meant drawing a line that could never be erased. But staying silent meant waiting for him to try again. Around midnight, the phone buzzed with a new message. The screen lit up in the dark, and for a moment, I hesitated before picking it up. The text was short, the words chilling in their simplicity. "You should have drunk it by now." I stared at the screen, my hands icy cold. There was no name attached, but I didn't need one. I knew exactly who had sent it. I set the phone down slowly, my chest tightening. It was no longer a suspicion, no longer just a crease on a cork or a gut feeling. This was intent spelled out in black and white. The morning after I handed over the message and the test results, I knew there was no turning back. I drove into town again, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The station looked the same as it always had: brick walls, flag out front, officers stepping in and out with their coffee cups. But walking through those doors felt like stepping into another life entirely. Detective Alvarez met me in her office. She gestured toward a chair, her desk crowded with stacks of case files, a framed photo of her kids tucked in the corner. She studied me with that same steady gaze, neither harsh nor soft, but precise. "Mr. Miller," she said, "I've reviewed the materials you brought. The text message is compelling, and your friend's lab results are serious. But I need you to understand cases like this are delicate. A father accusing his own son of attempted poisoning will draw scrutiny." I leaned forward, my hands clasped. "Scrutiny is better than a coffin. I don't want to believe my son could do this, detective, but I can't ignore what's right in front of me." She nodded slowly. "Then we proceed. Carefully, I'll open a file and begin surveillance. But Arthur, once this moves forward, it won't be easy for you. Are you prepared for that?" I thought of Michael's shallow breaths in the hospital, of Emily's tears, of Linda clutching her Bible, and I thought of that message glowing on my phone. "You should have drunk it by now." "I'm prepared," I said, though my chest ached with every word. That afternoon, I tried to settle into the rhythm of an ordinary day. I sat on the porch with a cup of weak coffee, watching the mailman roll by, listening to the hum of lawnmowers down the block. For a few minutes, I almost convinced myself things were normal. Then the doorknob turned. I froze. I hadn't invited anyone, but the sound of a key slipping into the old lock made my blood run cold. The door creaked open, and there he was, Daniel, stepping into my living room like he still belonged there. "Dad," he said, his voice low, too casual, "you didn't answer my calls." I stood, my heart thudding. "What are you doing here?" He held up a key, dangling it between two fingers. "Guess I never gave this one back," he smirked. "I wanted to see you, in person." I felt the distance between us like a canyon. The boy I'd once taught to ride a bike now stood in my living room, eyes sharp, jaw set. "You don't trust me anymore, Dad?" he asked, his tone almost mocking. I met his gaze, steady as I could. Trust is earned, son, not demanded. The smirk vanished. His face tightened, shadows flickering across his features. For a long moment, the only sound was the clock ticking on the wall. "You think I'd hurt you," he finally said. Not a question, an accusation. My throat went dry. "I think Michael is lying in a hospital bed because of a bottle that came from you. And I think if I'd opened it first, I'd be lying there too." His hands clenched at his sides. "You've always been against me, always taking someone else's side." "That's not true," I said quietly. "But actions have consequences." We stood there in silence, two men bound by blood but divided by something deeper than years. Then he turned abruptly, slipping the key back into his pocket. "You'll regret this," he muttered, and walked out the door. I sank into my chair, my whole body trembling. The house felt smaller, darker, as if his presence had left shadows behind. I stared at the door long after it shut, the words "you'll regret this" ringing in my ears. The phone rang just as dusk fell. I picked it up with a hand that still shook. Alvarez's voice came through, calm but edged with urgency. "Arthur, it's Alvarez. We executed a search warrant at your son's house this afternoon. We found multiple glass jars filled with suspicious liquid and plant extracts. It looks like more than a hobby." I closed my eyes, the weight of it crushing me. Proof. More than suspicion. More than a crease on a cork. The truth was spilling out now, undeniable. After Alvarez's call, I sat in my chair for a long while, the silence pressing in like a heavy fog. I had wanted the truth, but the truth was cutting me open. The boy who used to run across our yard barefoot, begging me to toss him a baseball, had grown into a man keeping jars of poison in his house. Linda arrived not long after, bringing a basket of cornbread wrapped in a dish towel. She took one look at me and set it down without a word, her eyes sharp with worry. "What did Alvarez say?" she asked. I told her everything. The jars, the extracts, the liquid sealed in glass like experiments no father should ever imagine his son conducting. Her face paled, and she crossed herself out of old habit. "Oh, Arthur," she whispered, "it's worse than we thought." I nodded, my throat tight. "He came here today, walked right in with a key I didn't know he still had, asked if I trusted him, told me I'd regret this." Linda gripped the back of a chair, her knuckles white. "You need protection. You can't be alone in this house, not with him wandering in whenever he wants." The thought of leaving my home twisted my stomach. Every photo on the wall, every creak of the floorboards, held the story of my life. But Linda was right. The walls that once sheltered me now felt like paper-thin defenses. The next morning, I met Alvarez again. She spread photos across the desk, shelves lined with jars, notebooks scrawled with Daniel's slanted writing, diagrams that looked like recipes but for something darker. "Arthur," she said, her voice firm, "this is evidence of intent. It isn't just curiosity about plants. He's cataloging toxicity levels, measuring dosages. And one notebook, she tapped a page with her finger, mentions your name." My breath caught. "My name?" She slid the photo closer. On the page, in Daniel's familiar hand, was a note. "Dad, dosage adjusted for cardiac weakness." It felt like a blade twisting in my chest. There was no more room for doubt, no refuge in hoping I'd misunderstood. Alvarez watched me carefully. "We'll be moving forward with charges. But I wanted you to see this yourself. I know it's painful." Painful wasn't the word. It was shattering. The days following Alvarez's discovery moved in a blur, each one heavier than the last. I heard the news from her directly. Daniel had been brought in for questioning. The sight of his own notebooks and jars stacked on a police table had been enough for them to hold him overnight. For a brief moment, I felt a strange relief, like a storm had passed and I could finally breathe. But storms don't end so quickly. The very next day, Daniel walked out of the station, his lawyer at his side. Charles Whitman was his name, a man I remembered seeing around town now and then. Sharp suits, sharper tongue. Folks said he could talk a rattlesnake out of its fangs. And now, he was working for my son. I sat in Alvarez's office when she delivered the update. Her jaw was tight, her pen tapping against her notepad. "Arthur," she said, "Whitman is good. He's already arguing that the jars could belong to anyone, that the notebooks don't prove intent. He's painting Daniel as a misunderstood hobbyist, not a criminal. I rubbed my temples, exhaustion clawing at me. A hobbyist doesn't write down dosages for his father's heart condition. She nodded. I agree, but the court of law needs more than what we think. We'll need to push harder. That evening, I stopped by the hospital. Michael was awake, pale but stronger, sitting up with Emily at his side. She smiled faintly when she saw me, but her eyes carried a weight I hadn't noticed before. We spoke quietly while Michael drifted in and out of light sleep. Finally, Emily pulled me aside into the hallway. Her hands trembled as she wrung them together. Arthur, I don't know how to say this. I placed a hand on her shoulder. Say it plain, Emily. We don't have time for careful words. She swallowed, eyes glassy. Daniel, he's been obsessed with plants for years. At first, I thought it was harmless. He'd order books, join online groups, keep little jars in the garage. He said it was about herbal medicine, about curing illnesses. But then it got darker. My heart sank. Darker how? She looked at me, her voice breaking. He started keeping detailed notes about poisons, which ones killed quickest, which ones left the fewest traces. I confronted him once, and he said I didn't understand, that he was preparing for something bigger. I thought he was just being dramatic. But when I saw my father in that hospital bed, I realized what it really meant. Tears slid down her cheeks, and she covered her face with her hands. I should have said something sooner. I should have warned you. I shook my head gently. This isn't your burden, Emily. He made his choices, but your honesty now, it matters. It could save lives. Is Macon fresh for down? She nodded, wiping her face, but I could see the guilt still weighing heavy on her. By the time I left the hospital, the sky had darkened into a bruised purple. I drove home in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound. My thoughts circled around Emily's confession, the picture of Daniel in his garage surrounded by jars and books, scribbling notes about death like it was a science project. When I pulled into the driveway, Linda was waiting on the porch. She rose as I stepped out of the truck. You saw Emily, she said. Not a question, but a statement. I nodded. She told me things I didn't want to hear. Linda placed a hand over mine. Sometimes the truth isn't what we want, but it's what we need. Her words lingered with me all night. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the phone, knowing it was only a matter of time before Whitman made his next move. I didn't have to wait long for Whitman to make his move. The very next day, his voice filled the local news station, polished and confident, the kind of voice meant to sway juries before they ever sit down. My client, he said to the reporter, is a devoted husband, a hard-working man, and a curious mind. These accusations against him are nothing more than a tragic misunderstanding. The so-called evidence, the notebooks, the jars, none of it conclusively ties to him. And in fact, we now have expert testimony that the handwriting in those notebooks does not match Daniel Miller's. I sat in my living room, the television glow casting shadows across the carpet, my stomach sinking lower with every word. They showed a photo of Daniel walking beside Whitman, chin high, suit pressed, looking nothing like the son I remembered or the man Alvarez had uncovered. The phone rang not long after. It was Linda. Arthur, turn that off. Don't give him the satisfaction. It Buddy aspired. But I couldn't. I needed to hear every lie, every twist of the knife. Later that evening, Alvarez called. Her tone was steady, but I could hear the frustration in it. Arthur, Whitman's pushing the handwriting analysis hard. He found an expert willing to testify that the notes could belong to someone else. It's enough to muddy the waters, at least for now. I gripped the receiver. But Emily told me herself. She saw him with those jars. She knew about the notes. Leave her at the Rose. And her testimony will matter, Alvarez assured me. But Whitman thrives on doubt. If he can plant just enough of it, the case gets messy. I sat in silence, the weight of it pressing down. Finally, I said, then we have to dig deeper. There has to be more. The next day, Emily came by the house. She stood on the porch, arms crossed against the autumn wind, her eyes red but resolute. I saw the news, she said. Charles is lying. Daniel wrote those notes. I've seen that handwriting 1,000 times. Grocery lists, birthday cards, angry letters he never sent. I know it's his. Her voice cracked, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. He looked so calm on television, like none of this mattered, like he could talk his way out of everything. I guided her inside, poured her a cup of coffee, and we sat at the table where I had spent so many sleepless nights. Emily, I said softly, the truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers until the right ears are ready to hear. Alvarez believes in this case. I do too, but we need you strong. She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. I'll testify, whatever it takes. He can't keep hiding behind Whitman's words. The courthouse in our county wasn't much to look at, brick from the 50s. Tall windows streaked with rain, a flag flapping above the steps. But that morning, as I walked through its doors, it felt like entering the center of the world. Folks lined the sidewalks, whispering, staring as if they'd never seen me before. Some nodded with sympathy, others shook their heads, already choosing sides. Inside, the wooden benches creaked under the weight of neighbors, church members, even old co-workers from the factory. Word had spread fast, and in a town like ours, gossip travels quicker than the wind. I felt every pair of eyes on me as I made my way to the witness table. Daniel sat across the room, shoulders squared, his suit crisp. For a moment, I caught the faintest flicker of the boy I'd once raised. Then his lawyer leaned in, whispering something in his ear, and the look on his face hardened into stone. Judge Hall, an older man with thinning hair and a reputation for fairness, called the room to order. Whitman rose first, smooth as silk, flashing a smile at the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, this is not a case about poison or intent. This is a case about perception. A grieving, aging father has misinterpreted his son's actions, and now a misunderstanding has spiraled out of control. He gestured toward me, his tone respectful but edged. Arthur Miller is a man of years and experience. We respect him, but age has its limits. Memory falters, judgment weakens. And in the fog of grief, even the most honest man can mistake shadows for threats. The words stung, like nettles brushing bare skin. I clenched my hands in my lap, my pulse pounding. When it was my turn to stand, I gripped the railing of the witness box and steadied myself. My legs felt heavy, but my voice found strength I hadn't expected. I may be old, I said, my voice shaking but sure. But I know the truth when it stares me in the face. The room went quiet. The jury's eyes shifted, some leaning forward. For the first time, Whitman's smile flickered. He pressed on, though, circling me with questions meant to confuse. Mr. Miller, he said smoothly, how often do you misplace your keys? Forget where you've parked your truck. Can you honestly tell this court you've never made a mistake with memory? Yes, I said, my voice firm. I've misplaced keys, I've forgotten errands, but I didn't imagine a bottle delivered to my door. I didn't imagine my friend nearly dying after drinking from it. And I didn't imagine the message on my phone telling me I should have drunk it by now. Gasps rustled through the courtroom. Whitman straightened, adjusting his tie, but I could see the tension creeping into his jaw. Judge Hall leaned forward, his gavel resting loosely in hand. Proceed, Mr. Whitman. Whitman turned back to the jury, smoothing his expression. Ladies and gentlemen, consider the possibility that what Mr. Miller interprets as threats are simply misunderstandings. Families argue. Words are twisted. Bottles can be tampered with by others. We must not let emotion override reason. At this spurred. I wanted to shout, to demand they see through his polished words. But I held my tongue. Truth needed patience, not rage. As the day wore on, witnesses spoke. Alvarez presenting evidence, George explaining the lab results. The jury listened, faces unreadable. I felt the scales tip back and forth with every word. By late afternoon, exhaustion pulled at me. I sat on the bench, hands folded, when suddenly Emily rose from the gallery. Her voice cut through the murmur of the room. Your Honor, I'd like to testify. Heads turned. My heart leapt into my throat. Emily's words seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the judge's gavel. For a moment, the entire courtroom froze. Jurors, neighbors, Even Whitman's polished composure cracked just slightly. Judge Hall adjusted his glasses and studied her. "Mrs. Harris," he said, "this court is not in the habit of taking surprise witnesses, but if you have testimony relevant to this case, you may speak." "In others, and the mused and wrong." Emily's hands trembled as she stepped forward, but her voice grew steadier with each word. "Daniel is my husband, and Michael Harris is my father. I never thought I'd stand here, caught between them, but I can't stay silent." She looked at me, and I saw the pain etched across her face. Whitman objected, rising quickly. "Your Honor, this is improper. She has not been sworn in, nor prepared for testimony. This is emotional theater." Judge Hall silenced him with a firm glance. "Mr. Whitman, the court will hear her. Emotions may run high in cases like this, but truth has no timetable." Emily took her oath and sat, her eyes flickering toward Daniel. He didn't meet her gaze. "I've seen those notebooks with my own eyes," she began. "I saw Daniel write in them. I saw him keep jars in our garage. At first I believed him when he said it was just plants, just harmless research. But when I found notes about dosages, about how much it would take to harm someone with a weak heart, I knew something was wrong." The room filled with a low murmur, the jury leaning forward. Whitman pounced, striding toward her. "Mrs. Harris, you've been under stress. Your father's illness, your husband's arrest. Perhaps your memory is clouded by grief?" Emily's chin lifted. My memory is clear enough to remember the way Daniel looked at me when I asked why he needed those poisons. He said I wouldn't understand. He said it was preparation. I didn't know for what until now." Her voice broke on the last word, but she steadied herself, gripping the edge of the stand. Whitman pressed again, his smile thin. "And you waited until today, until the middle of trial, to bring this up?" She shot back with quiet fire. "I was afraid of what he'd do if I spoke. But after watching my father nearly die, after watching Arthur live in fear every day, I won't be afraid anymore." "Is Avant Saint?" A hush fell across the room. Even Judge Hall seemed to pause, weighing her courage. I sat rigid, my throat tight, watching the woman who had once been Daniel's closest ally now stand as one of the strongest voices against him. The betrayal cut deep, but so did the relief someone else finally saw what I'd been carrying alone. Whitman returned to his table, his jaw clenched. The balance in the room had shifted. For the first time, it felt like truth had gained ground over polish and charm. As the session adjourned for the day, I rose slowly, my legs stiff, my chest heavy, but inside me a flicker of hope stirred. The trial was far from over, but we were no longer fighting in the dark. The trial had stretched on, each day heavier than the last, but everyone in the room knew today would be different. Today, the evidence would either crush Whitman's arguments or give him one last foothold. Detective Alvarez took the stand first. She moved with the calm precision I'd come to rely on, a folder of documents under her arm. She began laying out the digital trail, Daniel's phone records, the emails recovered from his laptop, the forum logs showing his username, posting detailed notes about toxic plants and extraction methods. The jury leaned forward, their pens scratching. Alvarez read aloud from one post, her voice steady. Dosage adjusted for cardiac weakness. Target: paternal subject. Well, a murmur rippled across the courtroom. My chest tightened as I heard the words spoken aloud, stripped of secrecy. Whitman sprang up, trying to recover ground. "Your Honor, online posts can be fabricated. Usernames can be stolen. We cannot know for certain who wrote these messages." But Alvarez anticipated him. She tapped another sheet. "We traced the IP address directly to Daniel Miller's home network and cross-referenced login times with his work schedule. It matches perfectly. It is never patient." The jury scribbled more notes, eyes narrowing. Whitman's polished mask slipped for just a moment. Next came Michael. He walked slowly to the stand, a cane supporting his weight, Emily steadying him until he sat down. The courtroom seemed to hush all at once. This wasn't just evidence. This was flesh and blood. Michael cleared his throat, voice raspy but determined. "I drank from that bottle. I remember the burning in my chest, the sickness that came on like fire. If Arthur hadn't called for help, I wouldn't be here today. I trusted my son-in-law, trusted that what came into my home was safe, and it nearly killed me." His words carried no theatrics, no embellishment, just plain truth, the kind that sits heavy in the gut. Whitman tried to rattle him with questions.
"Mr. Harris, could it not be that the bottle was tampered with after it left my client's possession?"
Michael shook his head. "Number, that bottle came sealed, and I watched Daniel's father hand it to me. There was no one else." The silence afterward was thick. Even Whitman's usual rhythm faltered, his voice catching as he tried to pivot. I sat rigid, hands clasped in my lap, every muscle tight. I had dreaded this day, but now, watching Michael hold his ground, I felt the tide shift. The jury listened to every word, their expressions carved in stone. When Michael stepped down, he passed by me, laying a trembling hand on my shoulder. That small gesture carried the weight of everything we had survived together. Judge Hall called for closing arguments. Whitman rose, straightened his tie, and tried once more to spin a story out of shadows. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said smoothly, "families are complicated, misunderstandings grow, emotions flare, but do not mistake grief and suspicion for evidence. My client has been painted as a monster by fear and circumstance, not by fact. And is trying to." His words echoed, but they no longer carried the same shine. The jurors shifted, some with arms folded, others with lips pressed tight. Then, Alvarez took the floor. She spoke with the calm certainty that had guided me from the beginning. She laid the documents one by one before the jury. The text message telling me I should have drunk the bottle by now. The email drafts retrieved from Daniel's computer. The forum logs with his username posting late at night. "This is not suspicion," she said firmly. "This is not grief. This is documented intent. Daniel Miller planned the poisoning of his father and his father-in-law. He calculated, he tested, he acted." Her voice cut through the air like a bell. The jury sat straighter, pens stilling. Deliberation began shortly after. The jury filed out, leaving the rest of us in restless silence. I sat with Linda and Emily on either side, their hands steadying me as the minutes crawled into hours. Every creak of the courthouse floor, every cough from the gallery echoed in the waiting. Finally, the door opened. The jury filed back in, solemn and unreadable. My pulse thundered in my ears. The foreman stood, holding a slip of paper. Judge Hall nodded. "We, the jury, find the defendant Daniel Miller guilty of attempted murder of Arthur Miller and Michael Harris. We recommend a sentence of 25 years. The words struck me like a hammer, final and undeniable. Gasps and whispers rippled through the courtroom. Emily pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling. Linda bowed her head, whispering a prayer. I looked at Daniel. For the first time since the trial began, he met my eyes. What I saw there froze me. Hatred mingled with despair, a look that cut deeper than any verdict could. The bailiff moved to escort him out, but his gaze never wavered. It was as if he wanted to burn that look into me. One last message, equal parts fury and defeat. When the gavel finally fell and the room began to empty, I stayed seated on the wooden bench, my hands folded tight. Around me, voices buzzed with shock and chatter, neighbors dissecting the verdict, reporters murmuring into their phones, but I couldn't move. The words 25 years echoed in my head, both a sentence and a silence. Linda's hand rested on my shoulder, firm and steady. "Arthur, let's go home," she whispered. Home. The word felt foreign. How does a father go home after hearing his son branded guilty? How do you reconcile pride and justice with the hollow ache of losing blood? I rose slowly, the courthouse lights sharp against my eyes. Outside, the autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and rain-soaked concrete. A few townsfolk lingered on the steps, some offering nods of sympathy, others avoiding my gaze altogether. Small towns have long memories, and this story would be retold in potlucks and pews for years. Linda stayed close, her presence a quiet anchor. George Simmons was waiting by my truck. His broad frame leaned against the door, arms crossed like he'd been guarding it for me. "You held your ground," he said softly. "Not every man could have done that." I shook my head. Ground feels shaky all the same. George put a hand on my arm. Shaky's still standing. Back at the house, Emily was already there, sitting on the porch steps. Her eyes were swollen, her hair pulled back in a loose bun like she hadn't slept. When I approached, she rose quickly, wringing her hands. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I should have spoken sooner. I should have stopped him before it ever came to this. I failed you. I failed my father." I studied her face, the mixture of guilt and grief etched deep. She was Daniel's wife, Michael's daughter, and now caught between the ruins of both. "You spoke when it mattered," I told her. "And it took courage I'm not sure I would have had at your age." She shook her head, tears spilling. "But he hates you now, and he'll hate me too." I sighed, heavy and slow. Hate is his burden, not ours. Linda stepped forward, slipping an arm around Emily's shoulders. For a moment, I saw in them the fragile beginnings of something like healing. A day later, I went to see Michael. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and brewed coffee, the halls lined with nurses' clipped footsteps and the low hum of machines. Michael was propped up in bed, a blanket over his knees, a Bible resting on the table beside him. His face lit up when he saw me, though weariness shadowed his eyes. "Arthur," he said, voice rough but warm. "Looks like we're both still standing, by the grace of God." This is wording the self. I pulled up a chair beside him, and for a while, we just sat in silence, looking out the window at the courtyard where a lone oak tree shed its leaves. Finally, he spoke again. "Justice has its price, doesn't it?" I nodded slowly. "It does. I fought for it, but now I wonder if I'll ever feel whole again." Michael reached out, his hand gripping mine. "You saved me, and you saved yourself. Don't ever forget that." Vister is rive round. We sat together on that hospital porch later, bundled in sweaters, watching the sky deepen into twilight. The air smelled of damp earth, the world carrying on as though nothing had shattered inside us. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box to the right.